As much as I regret how long this took to make, as promised, here is Bela Dimitrescu's character essay. If you'd rather just read the transcript, it will be up on my Patreon and the link to it will be in the description. Anyways, you would think I'd have a lot more to say about her, considering she used to be my favorite sister, but we'll see how far I go with what we know and my own headcanons of her. So, to start off, the most we know about Bela is that she's the oldest daughter. She despises messes, she's level-headed, quiet, and she's the smartest of the trio. Her level-headedness likely comes from being the oldest, and probably also because of the duties or responsibilities given to her from Alcina. She'd have to make the rational decisions of the trio as their makeshift leader, and this is probably something her mother taught her as she raised her from her birth. As the oldest, she has a role, and she is expected to follow it and the traits that come with it, if that makes sense. One of the things I really like about her character and personality is that while she's chasing Ethan throughout the cellar, she certainly doesn't seem like she's very excited to be doing so, unlike Cassandra or even Daniela. She often mocks or belittles him in a monotone voice, and if you manage to look at her before or after she attacks, you'll see her eyelids are usually drooping, a sign that she is calm and bored. She does have moments where she seems to get a little excited or into the chasing, but overall, most of her voice lines are said without emotion. One of my favorites is when she asks which tools Ethan would prefer, as if she's simply asking him how the weather is. How nonchalant she appears to be is something I adore about her and think is incredibly interesting. I would assume she's the second best huntress out of the three daughters, right behind Cassandra, and she's probably pretty confident in her abilities to take Ethan down. All things considered, she should have, but that's a topic for another day. Being the smartest, we can also assume she probably spends a lot of her time in the library as well, but she likely reads more refined books, whereas Daniela chooses romance novels and such. I personally like to think she does read some of the things her youngest sister recommends to her, more just to bond more with her. It's possible she might be a history nerd too. There are tons of books in the library, possibly hundreds, and while I assume she's read plenty of them, she probably stays toward books with actual plots or nonfiction to learn more about the outside world, assuming those books are even permitted. While on the topic of her hobbies, I do think she's also a musician, something plenty of the fandom seems to agree on. This could be because of her admiration for Alcina, who was a jazz singer, and perhaps got lessons from her mother and went from there. Since she's been alive so long, it can be assumed she knows how to play a variety of instruments, ranging from the piano in the opera hall to anything stringed and imported. Maybe she's even created her own pieces from time to time. And this is my own silly headcanon, but I imagine Cassandra probably makes fun of her for it, as she tends to annoy and tease those she cares for, but likely still enjoys those peaceful moments where she can relax with her older sister, as rare as those times are. I believe it's also pretty popular in the fandom that Bela is the sister that craves the most praise and approval from those she cares for, something I'm sure she definitely wants from Alcina. She does seem like a bit of a people pleaser to a certain extent, uncaring of what the maids think of her, but still needing and wanting to keep up her reputation. Does that make sense? To kind of go further into that, she would, of course, want Alcina to be proud of her and the things she accomplishes, but she would work hard to put on this face of someone she is supposed to be rather than who she actually is. Bela Dimitrescu is the fierce oldest daughter, the shadow of her mother, the one in charge of her other two chaotic siblings. She is the heir to Castle Dimitrescu, the sanest, and the most responsible. This is the face she puts on, the one she thinks her mother expects her to wear to be deemed worthy as an heir. Bela herself, however, while she is like that, is so much more. She is not simply a sadistic woman that has no interests beyond being cruel to the maids, nor would she spend all of her time running errands or filling out ledgers for her mother. She has interests, hobbies, things she wants to do rather than things she has to do. I do think that, as the oldest sibling, she probably takes an interest in whatever her sisters are doing just to bond with them. While I don't think she gets along with Cassandra a lot of the time, she would probably still be the typical older sister, bugging her to talk or gently teasing her about her sketches or other things she creates. Maybe she even helps down in the cellar, being the one to dissect or torture victims so that Cassandra can write things down about them. She might even offer what other knowledge she knows to help her little sister. With Daniela, She would probably either read to her or with her, whatever her youngest sister would want during this time. This is just something sweet, but with Daniela clearly liking gardening, I'm sure Bela encourages this and spends time with her outside when she can, helping to pick certain flowers or maybe getting some seeds imported that she thinks her youngest sister would like. I'm sure she's gotten her ear talked off about flowers more than once. Another thing I like to imagine with her is that she likes to people watch. She's noted by Capcom to be the quietest of the three, something I think we can see with how little she talks to Ethan as compared to her sisters, and I like to think she'll search for mental weaknesses in a person. She'll watch someone she is interested in or suspicious of, and getting on her bad side would mean a very, very long mental game where her prey is always the loser. When she's not doing that though, maybe she just likes to see how people interact with one another or make up her own stories or theories on the maids to gossip about to her sisters later. She's probably the one the staff feel most comfortable with, seeing how she's not prone to unjustified sadistic outbursts like a certain someone, and this gives her a better chance to know people and watch them easier. I also get the idea that Bela often dislikes people disobeying her for any reason, and it's probably why she gets so agitated with her sisters and their immaturity. This can be seen in some of her voice lines where she's berating Ethan or snapping at him to behave, both when she's weakened and when she's lazily chasing him around the cellar. She has a certain air of authority around her, probably from being the oldest and taking after Alcina, and it can be assumed she doesn't like not being followed or listened to. I highly doubt any of the maids would dare disobey her, for fear of the mental or physical toll she would force on them, but in the event one did, she would likely take it as a challenge to get them to obey her. I'm not entirely sure how she would go about this, but I can assume it's filled with her intentionally messing up their duties so that her mother would take notice, and she would then be permitted to punish as she sees fit. Whereas Cassandra would likely be more precise in her torture methods, Bela would probably be a little messier, but still with the knowledge of what hurts most when it's cut or chopped off. I also think she may have a bit of a superiority complex, given by some of her voice lines, like where she calls Ethan little one or calls him stupid, and the fact she's the smartest sister. This actually would make sense, as many people with a superiority complex are often insecure in some way, and this could be that she fears she isn't actually good enough, that there are better people out there than her. This is something I often implement into my writing. Bela pretends and puts on this face of confidence that she isn't afraid or worried about anything, but deep down, she fears being alone or being abandoned because she was not good enough. This could extend to her feelings toward her mother and how desperately she craves praise and approval, and also why she may be a little hostile toward her siblings on occasion. She's just stressed and has a lot going on in that head of hers, but I highly doubt she's really one to talk about what's bothering her or her fears. She might hint at it or talk after a while, but I feel she's a bit reserved in that area. She does talk about how the oldest daughter bears the burden, and this could allude to her feeling as though she can't talk about her worries or fears as she must be strong for her sisters. I will link this in the description, but an article I looked at mentioned that the oldest child tends to reflect their parents' beliefs and their attitudes. This would actually apply to Bela and Alcina in a lot of ways. Their strides are similar. Bela also dislikes men and views them as inferior, and seems more careless when chasing her prey, perhaps because she's confident in her abilities to take them down, just like Alcina is. This could also be another reason why she has an interest in music, or why she is a bit hostile with her siblings, just like Alcina is with hers. I hope this is all making sense so far. I'd be more than happy to clarify anything. Another thing I wanted to talk about is Bela's clear dislike for messes. We obviously don't see a lot of her in-game, a crime of its own, but she does seem to have a few symptoms, and I noticed I've implemented a few into my writing about her. The first one, of course, is that she dislikes messes and cleaning up after people, seen in her voice line when she finds Ethan in the cellar. She seems to prefer being orderly and neat, and this probably applies to a lot of things in her life. I can imagine she probably has her own organization of books in the library, and dislikes when someone, maid or sister, disrupts that. I can also imagine Cassandra likely does that on purpose to be the annoying little sister. This dislike for messes could also stem from how Alcina is, who also clearly dislikes messes. Being a noblewoman, she probably wants things to be clean and neat, and that likely could have just rubbed off on Bela. She wants to be the perfect example and the perfect daughter, so she just adopts all China's views and beliefs to do so and be seen a certain way by those around her. The one thing I've implemented into her character when I write her is a fear of losing control and harming herself or others. I often write her as the one with the second most control, but that it snaps rather easily under certain circumstances. Her daily life, though, would probably consist of her fear of losing that control and doing or saying something she doesn't mean to or harming someone she didn't want to, all because she could not keep herself in check. That could also tie in with her fears of being abandoned or not being good enough. If she loses control and harms someone close to her, will they leave her because of it? Will her mother think less of her? OCD is a serious disorder and is not simply liking things to be neat and orderly. It is obsessive-compulsive for a reason, and without seeing how she acts normally, it is a bit difficult to say for sure she has this. Since her personality and character were also not expanded upon in game, I don't want to assume she has it, but I did find it interesting when the idea was brought up. Those were just the two main things I noticed. But if you want to look more into it, I'll link my sources in the description. Just like I always say, I don't like assigning serious disorders to fictional characters, especially when we really barely know anything about them. I personally think she just suffers from some form of an anxiety disorder, and her fears could stem from that as well. Wanting to please those she cares for in various ways, afraid of things out of her control, caring deep down what others think of her, despite the face of carelessness she puts on. It does seem a bit more believable. The one thing I do find interesting about her when she's weakened is how aggressive she becomes. While she's chasing Ethan throughout the cellar, she just seems like she's bored and doesn't really care too much about him or his presence. This could allude to her noblewoman personality and thinking. She's above such annoyances, but as soon as she's weakened, she's cruel and violent. She lunges at Ethan, growls at him, snaps at him to obey her, and she does briefly talk about how she's going to kill him. Any flirty lines she had are gone, and she now calls him stupid or gets mad he's not respecting her or her family name. I do think she's a bit of a spoiled brat, something that is 100% all China's fault, and that is why she calls him impertinent and makes a comment about him daring to bare his teeth at her and her family. Another thing I saw brought up some time ago was that Bela seems to have a thing for pushing her prey to the ground. We see this when she's introduced, during her special kill scene, the cuss scene where she corners Ethan, and even when she lunges at him while she's weakened and knocks him down. I'm not entirely sure what this could imply or say about her character. Perhaps it's a hint to her superiority complex, or that she believes she is above her prey and fully thinks they are lesser than her if she can push them down so easily. Assuming she was able to act like herself, this would certainly be the case, but I'd love to hear your opinions on why she does that. When we talk about her appearance, however, I find it quite interesting. We know she has blonde hair and a red pendant, but what about the blood on her cheeks and neck? She has the most on her face out of the three, probably because she's the oldest and feasted the most, and if you look closely, you can see the blood almost looks like a smile. When it comes down to it, Bela is probably the most dangerous of the three sisters, because if she likes to, people watch and learn weaknesses. She'd have you disarmed before you could even think to fight back. She would be the sister that actually seems like the safest and makes herself out to be that way, only to stab her prey in the back when they're most vulnerable. She reminds me of a more sadistic version of Daniela. Sure, she may seem the sanest of the three, and even kind at times, but the second you're considered her prey, your life is already forfeit. If you've ever looked closely at her concept art, she has hair covering half of her face, droopy eyes, and a knowing smile on her face. I think her design in and of itself could hint toward her being unstable when she loses control of herself, where the blood smile hints toward her sadism, but her outward kindness and teasing hints toward her being relatively normal until she's weakened or disobeyed. I will delve deeper into what I believe the daughter's pendant colors mean if y'all would want to see it, but the main thing I noticed is that Bela's pendant color does match her personality. The main thing I saw was that the color red represents sacrifice, danger, and courage. Pause to read if you need to, but briefly, here is how I think each meaning represents Bela and her personality. The other thing I wanted to talk about was the smeared mascara on her face from obvious tear tracks. I haven't heard why this actually is, be it from her fear and sorrow before her experimentation and the FLI's taking on her last appearance, or if it was from her and Cassandra getting into an argument before Ethan came to the castle, like I've heard mentioned a few times. While both thoughts on the matter hurt in different ways, I think I prefer the latter. It would mean that they wouldn't have gotten to apologize to each other for whatever argument they got into, and it opens up the possibilities of them having regrets or even seeing each other again within the consciousness of the Megamycete and what would entail from that. If any of y'all believe the daughters did not care for one another and constantly got into fights over Alcina's approval and love, please kindly exit. I will make another video detailing how I personally think their relationships are, but nothing in canon even implies they disliked each other past normal sibling arguments. Anyway, you may have noticed that I did talk a lot about all three of them when this was specifically about Bela, but that was for a reason. From my own experience, while oldest siblings do have their own hobbies and interests, a lot of their time centers around their younger siblings. Bela is the makeshift leader of her sisters and probably tries to be interested in their hobbies to bond with them or further take on the role of the oldest, even if she does have her own that she does in her spare time. She seems like a busy woman, so I don't imagine she actually has a lot of time to do the things she wants to, but she's had over 60 years of being reborn into what she is. She'd have plenty of time to figure herself out, find what hobbies she enjoys and which ones she doesn't, and also take time to encourage the hobbies of her younger siblings. That's what the eldest does, after all. I'm sure Alcina does her best to encourage or support each of her daughter's hobbies, but even she is incredibly busy. The thought that she has left little instruments or new books around for Bela to find does warm my heart a little. Anyway, I think that's all I have on Bela for the moment. I hope everything has made sense so far, and I regret that hers didn't feel as detailed as her sisters were. I'd love to hear other headcanons or opinions you all have on her, or your own thoughts about her personality and character. If I have to revisit this upon thinking of more, I will, or I'll type my thoughts in the comments. I hope you're all staying safe and happy in these trying times. Please remember to drink plenty of water and eat lots of yummy food, and thank you so much for watching.